Hey everybody, it's Norm from Tested.
And Sean from Tested.
3D printing.
Yes, we have Jackie Wan.
That's right, Velcro, who works with Ultimaker, designs some really awesome stuff.
Intricate stuff.
It's beautiful, it's functional, and complex.
Yes.
And he's here today with another project to share with us, so let's go take a look.
Hi, we're back with Jackie Wan, aka Velcro. We've been doing a series of his prints and techniques, and we're back today with a very cool model, the Ducati. This blew me away when I saw it. I was like, it is one of the most complicated prints that I've seen done on a filament printer. So let's talk about this a little bit. The Ducati is actually printed in lots of different pieces.
Yeah, so this is around 40 pieces, and it was the most complicated print that I made up to this point. And the reason, because it's got a lot of holes in it. So a motorcycle has a lot of natural crevices, between the engine and sort of air intakes, and even the wheels with the disc brakes and everything. There's a lot of holes in it, and that's a problem for 3D printing usually, especially on filament printers.
So for example, it'd be hard to print the disc brake here with the wheel because of the separation between.
Exactly. If you did that, if you tried to print this whole assembly in one go, you would just have supports everywhere, and you would probably spend like an hour trying to remove supports, and it probably wouldn't look that good.
Right.
So that's why it's 40 pieces, and because even the tire itself is probably like 5 to 6 pieces, just to create the wheel itself.
So let's go through the process of this. What was the base model like?
Yeah, so the base model, we bought a base model to work with, and I mean, there's no use reinventing the wheel for that kind of thing. And to be honest, if you bought a model, it would probably look better than if I would have done it from scratch, and it would take far longer.
Right, and you're coming from a visual effects background, so time is money, and so if you can go out and buy a awesomely done Ducati model and use it legitimately, then yeah.
Exactly, and, if it's stuff that you have to create from scratch, if it's a design of your own, then obviously you would create your own. But if it already exists, in visual effects and in motion graphics, you usually just would find a model to work with to begin with anyway. So anyway, I went that route.
And just to be clear, this was not a model that was designed for 3D printing.
No, it wasn't. Right. It was a visual effects model. It looked great, but because it was a VFX model, the shell of it was very high poly, very high res. But there was no internal structure, so there's no volume within the shell itself. So you would have to create that volume in order for the 3D printer to know how to actually translate that into geometry.
Right. And just for those who may not be familiar, the problem you run into with trying to use assets for games or visual effects is that you can do unrealistic geometry. So you can make a cube. And if you're only going to see this side of the cube, you can leave the back off, and it's fine for digital purposes. But in real life, it's missing a side. You can't. It has no volume. It's not watertight. You can't print that. And so a lot of times when they're doing models like this, things will just be crammed together in ways that you couldn't do in real life. Or maybe if you didn't see the frame of the bike that's hidden behind the cowling here, they would just not make that because it's not needed. So.
Exactly. And all the red pieces, although they look great on the exterior, basically had no interior. So I mean, this piece here was a lot of work just to make the internals right, because there's actually an intake that goes all the way through here.
Right.
And to make that work in terms of real life volume was much more difficult because everything has to be attached. There has to be no missing faces for it to print properly. So I had to go in, and it's basically remodel. Some pieces were so shell-like that I basically had to remake the whole piece.
Right. Sometimes it's easier to remake it from scratch than to try to fix it.
Yeah.
Now, with that, a lot of times when you get models that were not meant for 3D printing, and then you have to do the work on it to make it printable, after you do the work, it can get kind of messy. The mesh can get messy, and then sometimes the printer will cause an error in the printing. So do do you do any mesh repair on these when you're done before you go to printing?
Yeah, so usually I do my mesh repair while I'm adding in the geometry. So if I keep it clean all the way through from start to finish, then I won't have to repair stuff as I go. But once in a while you have double faces, like faces that sit on top of each other, and those usually cause Boolean errors. So
when you're combining or subtracting parts from each other.
so if you're trying to subtract one piece from another, and there's one part where it has double faces, it'll just error and it wouldn't know what to do, or the program will crash.
Right.
So I had a lot of those kind of issues.
So step one was just getting this cleaned up to the point where it could actually be printed.
Yeah.
But you run into yet another problem that you can't just say print this and it'll print in one piece, at least not on a filament printer at home. So what was the next step to like make this printable as far as the orientation of pieces?
Yeah, so once the model is good and it's clean, I basically have to go through and decide what printing direction I'd like each piece, to optimize for the best quality, basically, because the X and Y look the best, and then the Z is always like a little bit iffy. So I choose the direction, and then I have to choose where the seams are going to be, and that's sort of the most important part about deciding where you want your 3D printed things, because if you had a seam across like the smooth areas of the bike, then you'd either have to fill it in later and then sand it and do stuff like that, or you'd have to just like not do that. So what I did was I chose the seams where there naturally are seams, so between the fuel tank and the body.
That makes sense because it naturally hides it then.
Exactly. So the fuel tank is actually printed this way, and the body is printed this way, so that I could have the seam there where I wanted it, and the printing direction would be nice, so that it gives me a good surface.
Right. So let's talk about some of the crazy details. Let's talk about like the chain. Like the chain. Looking at that chain, it looks like individual links all put together. So how did that print, and how successful was the print? Yeah,
so the chain was my minimum detail level. So basically what I do with a lot of models is I'll find the smallest detail that I know I'll need to print, and that will define my scale for the rest of the model. So
then you know that if that turns out, everything else will
because all the details are bigger than that. With the exception of the handlebars, which is like almost at minimum scale as well. So I would test those two parts and see what prints at the minimum resolution, and then find that scale, be it like like 1.25 or whatever, and then I would scale the rest of the bike at that same scale so that everything works together. And I know it's going to assemble at the end. I'm not going to be like create half the model and realize that one part of it was too small, and now I have to make everything either bigger or smaller, because that would just cause problems down the line.
So. Is this chain is printed as one piece, and does it actually fit on the sprocket that's on the
there? So the chain was printed in one piece. It was printed very slowly, but it is one piece all the way through, and it does actually fit onto the little teeth of the gears that you can see there.
Amazing.
So I mean, this surprised me because I didn't think it was possible to do that, but it came out. And I was actually very surprised it all printed. One of the failed prints, actually, I printed the chain first, and it failed the first time, and all the links came loose because it didn't connect everything yet.
Right.
So, like, it could have failed, but surprisingly, it worked out really well for this.
It looks amazing. So, what about the figure here?
Yeah. So
let's talk about that.
Yeah, the rider I didn't make. The rider was given to me by Michael Balzer.
Yeah.
He's from All Things 3D, and he was cool enough to send me a rider. He printed it on the Form 1, and I think he painted.
So he's like, this needs a rider. So
yeah, exactly.
I like it. It's kind of Tron-esque.
He asked me for the scale of the Ducati bike, so I sent that to him.
Nice.
And then he basically posed the model, and then he sent me the finished thing, which was like super awesome of him.
That's
so
great.
Yeah.
Mutual appreciation.
Yeah, and it fits perfectly on there. And it's just really cool, like as a showpiece. It like completes the bike.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this is another one you did finishing on.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about that a little bit because it looks great. Like the shiny parts are shiny like they should be.
Yeah. So the finishing, I didn't do a lot of sanding. I'm not a big proponent of sanding,
I'm right there with you. Yeah.
But for the red body parts, I did have to do it because those are known to be shiny,
smooth and sleek.
Smooth,
yes.
Yeah, very car-like. It wouldn't look right with it, sort of with lines and stuff. So those parts I sanded down a little bit. I filled it with a primer filler. and then I sand it down a little bit with wet sanding, and then those are enamel paints. So enamel paints tends to stretch a little bit, so it creates sort of a more candy-like shell. So that's why it shows sort of the red enamel paints. For the rest of it, the chains and the engine parts, that's all acrylic painting, and I didn't sand any of those parts.
They look great. Like the tires look like tires.
Yeah, the good thing is if you print well, like if you can make your print direction good, and then you print at a high enough resolution, you don't really have to do that much to it, you know, for it to look good.
Yes. Is there any, like, does the steering function on this? Or
the steering does move.
It's probably
it's a little fragile right now.
It's
so
probably delicate.
But yeah, that does move. The wheels don't turn. The front wheel turns, but the back wheel doesn't because of how the chain is set up. Like the chain is not a real like chain link.
Sure,
so that's what prevents it from turning.
So and you have these. This is available to download and print.
Yeah. So you can download this and print it yourself and build it yourself. It's 40 parts. It's fairly challenging as a print, but if you can,
it looks great.
Yeah, I mean, but yeah, totally
great. And where can we find you on the web?
So you can go to ridiculousbricks.com to find where I've put all my 3D models.
All right.
And then you can go to Umagine to download the Ducati bike
and other models that you've done.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, thank you. We'll see you next time with another episode with Jackie.